Hello and welcome to today's lesson, which is going to be on Belfast Confetti by Ciaran Carson. It is also part of the Edexcel conflict cluster that we are looking at. Now, there's a lot of context that you need to know to be able to understand this poem properly. First, part of the context that we're going to look at is a bit of background about the poet himself, Ciaran Carson. Now, Ciaran Carson was born in Belfast, which is the capital of Northern Ireland, in 1948. So he grew up in a period of history which is referred to as the Troubles. More on that later, of course, in Northern Ireland. Now, violence as a theme, or the effects of violence, often makes an appearance in Carson's poem, whether this is found in historical warfare in the long past or more recent conflicts of Northern Ireland, such as the Troubles. Now, what were the Troubles? That's what we're going to look at now in some detail. So the Troubles was an armed conflict that lasted from the 1960s all the way through to 1998, when the Good Friday Agreement was signed, and again, more on that later. So to be able to understand this conflict, or to have a basic understanding of this conflict, you need to know that it's centered around two groups of people, and these two groups of people had a serious disagreement over the status and the future of Northern Ireland. And as you can see, Northern Ireland is this country here above the Republic of Ireland and next to the rest of the UK, such as Scotland, Wales, and of course England. So one of these groups was called the Unionists. So on one hand, you had the Unionists. Now this group of people believed that Northern Ireland should be part of the United Kingdom, and that's what we currently have at the moment. And this is a map of the United Kingdom, and of course you've got England, you've got Wales, you've got Scotland, and you've got Northern Ireland. Now, below Northern Ireland, you have the Republic of Ireland, which is not shown on this map because it is not part of the United Kingdom. It is part of the overall landmass that has Northern Ireland, but it's not politically part of the United Kingdom. Now, the Unionists, and remember the Unionists, to be very clear on this, think that Northern Ireland here should be part of the overall United Kingdom, and that the Queen should be the overall monarch, and they were very much proud to be part of the United Kingdom. Now, the Unionists were mainly part of the Protestant religions. If you were a Unionist, bit of a tongue twister, then you were almost certainly a Protestant. Now, on the other side, you had the Republicans. Now, the Republicans had a very different belief about the status and the future of Northern Ireland. They believed that Northern Ireland should break away entirely from the United Kingdom, should have no association with the United Kingdom, and should be part of one united Ireland. Now, if you're a Republican, and so if you believe that there should be one united Ireland, no such thing as Northern Ireland, just one Republic of Ireland, away from the United Kingdom, then you are likely to have been a Catholic. Okay, so it's not only a political conflict, crucially, it's also a religious conflict. So you had the Unionists, okay, to recap, who believed that Northern Ireland should be part of the United Kingdom, and you had the Republicans who thought that Northern Ireland should be part of the Republic of Ireland, and it was very much Protestants versus Catholics, which is, of course, a conflict that dates back centuries and centuries throughout history. Now, what did this conflict look like? So there was it wasn't just a political disagreement, it was an armed conflict between these two groups. So both sides used violence and had terrorist groups which used violence to get across their messages and their grievances, i.e. the things they were unhappy about. The Unionists, and remember, and I'll keep saying this, the Unionists believed that the United Kingdom should be part of the UK. They had what would be called a terrorist group known as the Ulster Volunteer Force, among many other groups, but this was the main group, was called the Ulster Volunteer Force. And the Republicans, again, they had lots of groups, but the main one was the Irish Republican Army, famously known as the IRA. So these groups committed violence against each other, but also civilians. Now, the British Army was sent to assist in this conflict because, of course, at that time and still today, Northern Ireland was part of the UK. So it was felt that the British Army had a duty to intervene. However, many people in Northern Ireland, particularly if you were on the Republican side of the argument in terms of Northern Ireland, thought that the British Army had no place there. So this actually caused lots of tensions as well. Now, Bloody Sunday was a key event in this history, and it happened in 1972. And it was an incident where British troops opened fire on unarmed Republican protesters. 26 civilians were killed. So this is an event that stoked up a lot of anger in Northern Ireland, and only led to more fighting, more violence on both sides of the argument. So the Republicans were fighting the Unionists, Unionists were fighting back, and of course many innocent civilians were caught in the middle of this. So violence was very much commonplace on the streets of Belfast and the rest of Northern Ireland. The kind of environment that Ciaran Carson grew up in was a very violent environment for these reasons that I've gone over. So this very much forms the backdrop for the poem. So just one final piece of information. So eventually the conflict did officially end with the signing of a peace treaty known as the Good Friday Agreement. And generally this agreement, although controversial because it meant the release of prisoners on either side, it was a successful peace treaty. It did effectively bring an end to the violence between the Unionists and the Republicans. Now, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to read through the poem, and then we're going to go through the poem in line by line detail. Suddenly, as the riot squad moved in, it was raining exclamation marks. Nuts, bolts, nails, car keys, a fount of broken type, and the explosion, itself an asterisk on the map. This hyphenated line, a burst of rapid fire. I was trying to complete a sentence in my head, but it kept stuttering. All the alleyways and side streets blocked with stops and colons. I know this labyrinth so well. Balaclava, Raglan, Inkerman, Odessa Street. Why can't I escape? Every move is punctuated. Crimea Street, dead end again. A Saracen, Kremlin 2 mesh, Macrolon face shields, walkie-talkies. What is my name? Where am I coming from? Where am I going? A fusillade of question marks. Now we've read through the poem, what we're going to do is analyse the poem Belfast Confetti line by line. So we'll start off with the first line. Suddenly, as the riot squad moved in. So we're just going to stop there and just consider the fact that we've just jumped straight in to the action. Why has the poet done this? Why has he launched us, the readers of the poem, straight into the middle of the action? A couple of reasons. Well, firstly, it certainly hooks us in as readers, but also reflects the reality of war, that not everyone involved in conflict has made a conscious decision to sign up to the army with the knowledge that they may one day be asked to serve in a live conflict. Conflict can be thrust upon us. So it really reflects that idea that you could be walking along the street if you were in Northern Ireland during the Troubles, going to collect some shopping, for example, and you could be thrust into a conflict, even though you are innocent within this, that it involves innocent civilians. Okay, so conflict can be sudden, can be thrust upon you, and by thrusting us into the middle of the action, it reflects this. So as the riot squad moved in, it was raining exclamation marks. This is a very unusual metaphor here, raining exclamation marks. So what on earth does the poet mean? Well, this is all part of an extended metaphor that's going to run right throughout the poem. And remember, an extended metaphor is a metaphor that isn't just repeated once, it's repeated again and again throughout something, in this case throughout the poem. So it's raining exclamation marks. Now, just to set up this extended metaphor, because you're going to see it repeatedly throughout the poem, really there is an extended metaphor in the poem that links punctuation with the poet or the speaker's lack of ability to use language to describe this conflict. So really the main idea of this poem, and to understand the poem, you've really got to understand this idea. The main idea of Belfast Confetti is that language isn't enough to express the chaos and confusion of war. In fact, language fails the speaker, and in fact, punctuation rather than specific language takes the place of language, because language just fails him. He can't, the words aren't there. He can't articulate the sheer horror of this conflict. So we're going to see this repeatedly, the use of punctuation instead of language. So it was raining exclamation marks. Clearly it's not actually raining exclamation marks. It's all part of this extended metaphor that is actually about the effect of violence, how violence almost destroys language. So if we come on to the next line then, nuts, bolts, nails, and car keys. So this is all part of what's known as a lexical field. Now, a lexical field is simply a group of words that all relate to a similar meaning, or can all be categorized similarly. So in this case, nuts, bolts, nails, and even car keys, these are all metal objects. And what do they have in common, these metal objects? That they in this case they can all be used as almost homemade ammunition. Now, it was what happened during the Troubles. There was lots of obviously bombs set off, and some of these bombs, known as a nail bomb, were filled with nuts, bolts, and nails. And obviously, when this bomb would explode, all of this, all of these missiles, these nuts, bolts, and nails would fly through the air, obviously causing a great deal of horrible injuries. And car keys, again, this similarly links the idea of homemade ammunition, and also there were lots of car bombs during this time period. So even starting the ignition on your car could be a frightening business, because that you starting the ignition could be the ignition to a bomb that is inside your car. So moving on then, a fount of broken type. Now a fount would normally be quite a positive image, like a fountain or a fount of love. You'd often associate it with love poetry, but in this case, obviously, it's an unlimited fount or fountain of violence and conflict. Broken, so it says a fount of broken type. What could this be a reference to? The idea of typing. Well, some have theorised that the type in this case could relate to the media and the press, who would obviously write about this conflict, and they would obviously be very important in covering the conflict. And obviously there'll be a lot of opinions in the press about who was in the right. Is it the Republicans? Is it the Unionists? Okay, right, we move on. And the explosion. Note here, and the explosion, bit of enjambment here, the run online. So, and the explosion doesn't is not allowed a line of its own. What does this suggest? So, clearly explosion, a link to the conflict that was going on in Northern Ireland, and this explosion rips the sentence from the speaker. He's unable to properly continue his sentence. He has to have an extended pause, and this is really the point of this empty space here. This empty space here reflects the fact that this explosion has caused the speaker not to be able to articulate what is going on. So it says, and the explosion itself, an asterisk on the map. So normally an asterisk would be used to add detail to a paragraph. So say you've missed detail in a paragraph, you'd add an asterisk and you could go back in and add detail. But here, the asterisk almost reflects an explosion. So an asterisk on the map, it reflects the location of the explosion. So we move on. This hyphenated line, a burst of rapid fire. Very interesting here, hyphenated line. We carry on, same with asterisks and exclamation mark, with this extended metaphor where punctuation is used instead of language to reflect the conflict. Now, hyphens normally bring words together, but in this case, the hyphenated line actually links to the gunfire. So it says a burst of rapid fire, and we've got a use of an ellipsis here, and the ellipsis really represents the fate of this of what's going on and what has happened as a result of this rapid fire. We don't know, and that's where the ellipsis comes in there. And again, the poet makes use of space here. There is a whole line that is just left blank. Someone's life has been cut off as a result of this burst of fire. The fate of that unknown person is clearly not known, and so we're left a space here almost to reflect upon what's happened. So we go on. I was trying to complete a sentence in my head, but it kept stuttering. So again, the speaker hasn't got the language to articulate the conflict. So he tries to complete a sentence in his head that would explain his feelings on the conflict, but he's unable to do so. He kept stuttering. And the stuttering obviously links to where you're unable to articulate what you want to say. So there's pauses in your sentences. However, this use of the word stuttering also links to gunfire, the stuttering of a gun. If you think almost where people do an impression of a machine gun, that gap between the bullets being fired, that's the stuttering sound. Okay. All the alleyways and side streets blocked with stops and colons. Again, extended metaphor, use of punctuation because he cannot express what's going on with language. So obviously the reality here, alleyways and side streets being blocked. This is where the army and the police would cordon off certain areas that you weren't allowed to go to as a result of the ongoing conflict. Okay, so moving on to the second sort of stanza, although as we can see, there are lots of 2-3 word lines, so almost there's not really two clear stanzas, but we've broken it up into two. So we move on. I know this labyrinth so well. Balaclava, Raglan, Inkerman, Odessa Street. So he's saying he knows this labyrinth so well, but obviously, what is the word labyrinth? We often think of labyrinth as an intricate kind of maze where it's very difficult to escape from. And really, that very much links to the fate of the speaker. Although he may know the environment well, he finds it very difficult to escape it. And some of these words here, Balaclava, Raglan, Inkerman, Odessa Street, are actually references to a previous conflict, the Crimean War. So Odessa being a place in Ukraine linked with the Crimean War. Okay, so he says here, why can't I escape? So a rhetorical question here. Why can't he? What does this mean? Why can't he escape the conflict, the troubles that is going on in Northern Ireland? Or does it mean he can't escape his emotions, his thoughts and feelings about the conflict? So he says every move is punctuated. So clearly, as I keep sort of repeating myself here, but every move is punctuated. This is the extended metaphor of punctuation, the use of punctuation to replace language. But for me, punctuation almost has quite a violent undertone to it, or overtone rather. Punctuation, you almost envisage something being punctuated, almost stabbed, ripped. So it says Crimea Street, and again another reference to the Crimean War. Um, Dead end again. What does this mean? So perhaps it could be literal. So he's literally gone down a cul-de-sac, a dead end that he can't escape from. Or is this a dead end in his head? He can't. He's reached a point where he can't think about the conflict anymore. He can't explain it, and he feels like there's almost no return for him. So I mentioned a technique earlier in the poem that we're going to look at again now. With this line, a Saracen, Kremlin to mesh, macrolon face shields, walkie-talkies. Now this is all part of a lexical field. So this particular lexical field is the lexical field of war. All of these phrases linked to war. Saracen being a vehicle that the British Army would use during the Northern Ireland conflict. Kremlin to mesh would be material used in the riot shields by police, where perhaps objects and missiles would be thrown at them, and they would use these Kremlin to mesh riot shields. And again, talking about face shields that the riot police and the army perhaps would use. The idea of walkie-talkies used here within the lexical field of war is perhaps a little bit ironic, because obviously walkie-talkies would be used by the British Army as well as the Northern Irish police to communicate within each other, but used within this lexical field of war, it is almost ironic, because actually, although walkie-talkies are principally used to communicate, clearly in this war of divided sides between the Republicans and the Unionists, the British Army versus the Republicans, and indeed some of the Unionists, there wasn't much communication going on. And clearly, perhaps if there had been communication, perhaps the conflict would have been resolved earlier. So he goes on to say, what is my name? So this really cuts to the heart of the issue at really that is the centre of the conflict, which is that of identity. What is my name? He goes on to say, where am I coming from? Where am I going? So this is central to the idea of identity. Think about some of the history that I mentioned earlier on, the idea of whether you're a Catholic. So if you are a Republican, you think there should be a united Ireland, you're more likely to be a Catholic. If you are a unionist, that you believe Northern Ireland should be part of the United Kingdom, you're more likely to be a Protestant. So it's an identity idea here, and almost an identity crisis. Who is he? Is he a Catholic? Is he a Protestant? What does that mean? Does this define me? And these are the key question here. He obviously, as a part of his family, he would be almost made to choose one side, but perhaps he's beginning to question how much sense that makes to be, if you're on one side, you're forced to hate another side. Does this make sense? And these are the serious questions that he's asking himself here. The final line of the poem, a fusillade of question marks, really sort of capping off that extended metaphor. A fusillade would normally mean a series of rapid fire. So again, a clear link to the war setting. Think about Bloody Sunday, where the incident where the British Army shot dead those protesters. That would have been a fusillade of bullets. But here he has a fusillade of question marks. Again, language cannot be used to explain this conflict. So all he's left with is punctuation, and the particular punctuation that the poet ends with is question marks. Why is this conflict? And these questions will link to identity, will link to the conflict itself. Why is the conflict carrying on? When is it going to stop? That's what he's left with, a series of unanswered questions. Okay, now we've gone through the poet in line by line detail. We're going to have a little look at the form and structure of the poem. Okay, so form, and remember when we talk about form, we're talking about the shape, size and number of stanzas, also the type of poem. So at first it looks like the poem has two separate stanzas. If we look a little bit more closely, the poem's lines actually spill over, and we call that enjambment. Okay, so enjambment is when one line runs on to the next line, and often there are additional 2 or 3 word lines, so it gives the whole poem a rather messy, disorganized, inconsistent look. So it's not just 2 clear stanzas. This is a very almost a very uneven poem. Almost the lines are spiky, that there are some long lines that cut through, and there are many shorter lines as well, as if the very form of the poem is broken, spiky, and almost painful to behold. So why are the lines so messy, inconsistent? Well, it clearly reflects the confusion and the violence. Now this poem, as we've been over, is clearly about the confusion that war causes. The speaker himself doesn't even have the language to articulate his feelings about war. It's been replaced by this extended metaphor of punctuation. So it makes perfect sense that the form is also confusing, and as I said, long lines, short lines, a very distinctive form. Okay, so in a nutshell, the form is messy because, quite simply, war and the conflict is very messy. So what about the structure? So as stated, the poet makes lots of use of punctuation to reflect the confusion and disruption of war. Of course, the main idea of structure is the idea of the rhyme scheme. So the poem is written in blank verse. This means there is no clear rhyme scheme, and this of course reflects the chaos of war. In a poem that is all about the chaos of the troubles, and how the fact that it almost strips us of our ability to use language, it makes sense that the poem itself is not organised into a neat rhyme scheme. Okay, thanks very much for listening to today's lesson on Belfast Confetti by Ciaran Carson. There will be more lessons to follow from the edXL conflict series.